14th of June 2023. This is one of those rip the band-aid off Skidmarks. And you have to excuse me if I am emotionally aggressive. And actually, there's not a better description than pissed off. And for those that has got a problem with my, let's call it to be nice, brutal language or violent language, I'm sorry for you. But you must just understand one thing. We are where we are as human beings, as good, God-fearing people, because of this woke shit and politically correct shit, and that has led to nobody saying properly what they mean. Some commentators has addressed me on the way I speak, but let me explain something in as short as possible. Let's look at this LBCGD, fuck you, whatever numbers and alphabets and symbols you want to add to it, bullshit. When you want to address that, the people are walking on eggs and they use all sorts of verbose paragraphs to either present their support of that rubbish or to present their opposition to that rubbish. Now, the simple fact is this: if you are a Christian, you don't have a choice. You have to reject it. Because God's word says it's an abomination. Nothing to misunderstand about that. Nothing to misinterpret about that. Nothing to explain about that. And then you get shit like this. WEF calls for AI to rewrite the Bible and create a religion that are actually correct. What the fuck is that? What? Explain that to me. And let me warn you, try and justify that, and from me you will get one single response. Fuck off. I'm not going to try to be politically correct. I'm not going to try to give the impression that I'm a highly educated and so civilized and what the hell. That is bullshit. But yesterday I did a Skidmark in Afrikaans, a Briekmerke about gangs, benders. And I told you that I believe the WEF is a gang. Now we have a problem. In our country, South Africa, the DA is unashamedly tied to this gang. And they promote this gang. They promote things that this gang wants. Just think back what they did to the people in the Cape with the pestilence. And that little, yes, I don't want to give him a name because he's going to be brutal. Windy, the brave fucker that wants to arrest Putin. But what did he do to the citizens of the Western Cape? Think about that. All instructions from the gang, the WEF gang. Unashamedly, he executed their orders without paying any attention to the ramifications for ordinary people's lives. Businesses were destroyed. Job opportunities were destroyed. People were thrown into the back of the police vans for surfing. People were thrown in the police vans for being on the beach. That is the shit that he promoted and executed. And then Now we are in this situation that the conflict between BRICS and the G7/WF gang is now on the forefront. And where the fuck is this DA? With the G7, with the WEF. Now, Helen Zille wants to promote her struggle credentials for the fact that she hid a few terrorists in her back room during the apartheid era. To me, that is not bravery. That is treason. Because she gave refuge to the enemies of our state at that time. Is that brave? That's treason in my eyes. So, as far as her credentials is concerned, you know what I think. But now they want to rewrite the Bible. Of course they want to take all that LGBTQ fucking shit and they want to pump it into it so that we believe that. Wendy is making a lot of noise about AGOA. He is in Washington now at this moment as we talk. That's where he is. But I want you to pay attention to the following. Congress instructs Janet Yellen to have the Treasury and Federal Reserve make preparations and be on the ready for a situation where China dumps all their US treasuries overnight. I'm just laughing. There's fuck all they can do about that. And just never forget, this Yellen is in charge of a bank account with a $32 trillion overdraft. The ridiculousness is just unashamedly so shocking that if you have a brain and an IQ above room temperature, you have to say to yourself, they are fucked. Because that is what it is. They tried to make a loan from China last year so that they can give the money to Ukraine. And the Chinese told them, you're not creditworthy. Did the media publish that? No. But let's continue with the affiliation associations and gang members that this DA is supporting. Listen to this idiot. His surname is Cleverly. His surname should actually be Stupidly. Listen to the shit that he had to say yesterday. The heading is, you won't believe this. The Brits have stopped lying and now say in plain text that Ukraine can hit Russian territory because it's part of its self-defense. British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly about Ukrainian UAV attacks on Moscow. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can stop the video if you want to read all of that. The fact of the matter is, this is part of the gang that the DA is in. This Cleverly or Stupidly, actually a better name for him, obviously didn't see that video where that professor from some university in Moscow went to the trouble to make a graphic animation of what will happen to England if Russia launches one Poseidon torpedo at them. They've gone, they're off the map. There's nothing left of England. I cannot understand this. But let me try and calm myself down and continue. So this morning I see this. Washington gives the ANC government an ultimatum. Choose Putin or the South African economy. And it's from the DA. And then I got this. The Premier of Western Cape, Alan Wendy, is currently in Washington to assure the US government that the province remains committed to the terms of AGOA, The DA has launched court action to compel the South African government to arrest Vladimir Putin in August should he arrive at the BRICS summit. Yeah, these guys are strong and tough. And lo and behold, another one, and this time from Marula Media. Withuis ook bekommerd oor Suid-Afrika se verhouding met Rusland. Shithouse is worried about South Africa's relationship with Russia. Now, I'm going to read something to you, and you have to listen to this. The ridiculousness just has no boundaries. A formal request from a group of high-ranking congressmen to the United States Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, encouraging the State Department to reconsider hosting the upcoming AGOA forum in South Africa is the clearest indication that patience in Washington is fast diminishing. Patience in Washington is fast diminishing. Patience for what? They sit on a 32,000 rand overdraft of which China holds the bulk of the sureties. Okay, I call it sureties, but that's a reality. And they want to prepare themselves if China dumps those bonds and securities they have overnight. If China does that, they're gone. The dollar will be worth dipshit. Everything tied to the American economy is gone. Wiped out. The American consumers, which these AGOA gatkruipers is trying to save, will mean fuck all. Because that American consumers won't be able to buy bread. Think about this. The ANC government has now been presented with a clear choice. Denounce Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine or risk triggering thousands of job losses and tanking the economy. Okay. Tanking our economy. The fucking thing is tanked already. But the fact of the matter is, their economy is going to tank. And not thousands of job losses. Millions of job losses. What South Africa does in the next few days will mean the difference between economic chaos or the preservation of what is essentially the most important trade alliance for the country. Now take note, this was written. It's a commentary written by a DA. Let's call him a follower to be nice. The most important trade alliance. Now I've got a word, I've got a message to the people. And take note, it's not the ordinary citizens like me and you. It is the business people of South Africa, the commercial side, that are neck deep into the WEF and G7 and EU and USA and whatever. For years, they've been making their money by exporting to, let's be liberal, say 20% of the world's consumers. And that is what they built their enterprises on. And now, all of a sudden, that consumer bloc is not so rosy anymore. The EU is basically bankrupt. There are countries in Europe that will be worse than third world countries by the end of 2024. Don't believe me. Look at the realities and the facts. Germany is already in recession. Germany has been deindustrialized beyond repair. Germany is the financial backbone of the European Union. That thing is dying very fast. Yeah, they're still in denial about it, but the facts, reality is there. The numbers don't lie. Inflation through the roof, unemployment through the roof, their debt through the roof. Their economic activity and industrial activity through the floor. That's the realities. Same thing with Britain. Britain is in any case no longer a country, it's a colony of the WEF, complete with a WEF governor. So, America is still acting as if they are so important, they are so powerful, they have the influences. The only influence they have is they're under influence of that arrogance brand of whiskey that they've been drinking. And they have now become total alcoholics, totally dependent on that arrogance, and they cannot get rid of it, and they can't get out of it, and that arrogance is eating them up. But the DA is on their knees for America. Wendy is in New York and Washington and wherever. I hope he took a bucket of Vaseline with him, because otherwise he is going to have problems to walk back to South Africa. Fact of the matter is, they did not see the writing on the wall. This whole bunch that are pissing now about AGOA were depending, and they built their future and everything on less than 20% of the world's consumers. Don't forget that. 20% of the world's consumers. If you are a producer of apples, or a producer of nuts, or a producer of sweaters, or a producer of wool, or a producer of whatever, your success depends on the consumers that will buy that stuff. That's what you are dependent on. You banked on less than 20% of the world's consumers. You are isolating your whole future, putting it nicely into a Ziploc bag and zip it close. Or you are in that bag with 20% of the Earth's consumers. Here to the east sits 80% of the world's consumers. 80%. And here's the big difference. That is an emerging market of consumers. In other words, it is people that actually needs a lot of the shit that you are producing and will be buying it because they are desperate to get these things. You are going to go into a market where the consumer demand is enormous. Compare that to your markets here in the West, where the consumers are so fucking spoiled that they've got regulations and rules dictating your product, how your product must look, what your product must taste like, what your product must do, how you can get your product in there, all of that against the market where the consumer is hungry. It is like you walking to a cage. In the West, you're trying to feed a lion corn. Will he eat it? Maybe. He will most probably just chew on it for the hell of it. And here on the eastern side, you're looking at swarms of pigeons and doves and finches. They will eat, and crows, they will eat anything that you throw their way. So, you guys crying about AGOA, you're not going to get any sympathy for me because you made a strategic mistake. You didn't read the future right. BRICS, you know that organization that the Americans is trying to destroy. BRICS, you know that organization which has got members, 4 times the population size of this Holy West that you are so fond of and dependent on. And you must not forget, the West that you are ass-licking now, they are the reason for our country being in a situation where it actually is. But I did a skid mark on that. So the reality is this: the DA is trying to convince us, South Africans, that they are acting in our best interest. They're not. They're acting in the interest of a small gang, a small group of capitalists that have become filthy rich on the back of the WEF gang and globalist ideas and support. BRICS is ditching them. Now I see Macron, he wants to be part of the BRICS conference in August. What the fuck is that? Does he think for one moment Xi Jinping or Putin is going to allow that guy to be present at the BRICS meetings? That would be like inviting a wild cat in to look after your collection of lovebirds in a cage. They think the Chinese and the Russians are stupid, but let them wallow in that, because it makes them do stupid things, like trying to be present at the BRICS conference. BRICS was established specifically to get away from him and his type. Now they think that BRICS will entertain them. The reality of today is the DA is protecting specific interests. The DA is not protecting your interest, you, the ordinary citizen. And in all their actions, we can see it. They did it. They showed their colors. They showed their hand. And now, if you listen to the South African media, everybody is pissing about the AGOA. You must just understand one thing. The CIA playbook for a color revolution in South Africa is open. I have pointed out to some incidents that you should take note of. But this threat of AGOA is just one of the things that the Americans use worldwide. Threats like this, commercial threats, sanctions, and the collapsing of the currencies of the countries. That is what they do. That is how they overthrow governments. But they've got a major problem here in South Africa. They can play that book as well as they want to. There's just absolutely no way that they can change the ANC government for a DA government, because the optics is not going to be in their favor, because the DA is white, the management and the DA is white, and that kite will not fly, and they won't be able to sell that result to the Americans, the American citizens. So what are they going to do? My prediction is South Africa is going to be balkanized, because that's the only way that they can actually break the ANC grip on the country without the perception that they replaced a black government with a white government. So their options are small, and in my opinion, the only viable option they have is to balkanize South Africa. And we've got a timeline. They have to do that before August. They have to do it before August. Because the main aim is to derail BRICS. Because BRICS is a nuclear bomb that's going to blow the WEF, the Globalists, the G7 out of the water. It's going to blow the American hegemony out of the water. That is the realities. And BRICS, this August conference, is very important. There's something like 19 countries that has already been approved to be allowed into BRICS Plus. It is a monstrous operation. Another big problem for the West is the BRICS countries, the members of the BRICS countries represents a monstrous military machine. The West doesn't have a chance against it. Yes, we must keep nuclear off the table. And I'm convinced that between Putin and Xi Jinping, they will keep nuclear off the table as long as possible, because they both realize that a nuclear war is the end of everybody. So, let's continue with the DA. To date, the ANC has justified their failure to condemn Russia's invasion of a sovereign state under the auspices of non-alignment. This is intellectually dishonest, given the mounting evidence that the ANC are in fact not practicing their own policy. In February, on the anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, South Africa hosted the joint military exercises with Russia and China. In April, a sanctioned freight aircraft was permitted to land at Waterkloof military base. In May, the commander of the South African Ground Forces, Lieutenant General Lawrence Mbata, led a delegation to Russia to discuss issues relating to military cooperation and interaction. Last week, the inquiry into allegations that South Africa supplied weapons to Russia in December was classified by the presidency. Now, all of these things, I've handled it in the Skidmarks. These are all elements from the CIA's playbook for a color revolution. All of these things. Because what is said here, most of it, is just pure bullshit. The fact of the matter that they're making a story about the Chinese, Russian, South African Navy exercises. Where did these people learn international relationships rules? Where? South Africa is part of BRICS. Russia is part of BRICS. China is part of BRICS. That's why they have these exercises. But what this guy, this idiot that wrote this, don't say, is that currently NATO is planning a massive joint air exercise in Europe on the borders of Russia. And oh, that's fine. They can do it because they are NATO. But as I said in my Skidmark earlier, where I talked about Xi Jinping's message to the world, the Russians are busy castrating NATO. And like Scott Ritter said last night, in the 70s and the 80s, NATO had a body. NATO could go to the beach and take its shirt off, and the women would swoon around it for the biceps and triceps and all of that, and the six-pack and pecs and strong legs, but tanned nicely, thick bunch of hair. That was in the 80s, 70s, 80s, late 80s, early 90s still. Today, NATO is an old man with a sagging boob, no more muscle, thin arms, thin legs, bald head. That was such an accurate description of NATO. But South Africa is part of BRICS. We cannot send a delegation to Russia. Then the DA is unhappy. But John Steenhuisen galloped over to the Ukraine and he pranced around there in the west of Ukraine. And I can't talk too much about it because it got my channel nailed once. That specific visit of his, and he posed there on a few blown bridges in the west. And then he came back to South Africa with a hell of a, I don't know what to call it. But he was the brave man that went to Ukraine. That brave man didn't hop across the Dnieper River and go and get first-hand experience and information on what that Ukraine, that they are so supportive of, what they were doing to the Russians in the Donbass. Now, I'm going to make a statement now that's going to make a lot of people frown. Last week, all of a sudden, the DA called now for a commission of inquiry into the farm murders. A bit late. And the fact that they are quiet about what the Nazis in the Ukraine were doing to the Russians in the Donbass is exactly the same thing as their action towards the farm murders in South Africa. Because who are the people that are getting murdered? White Afrikaners, bulk of them. So, think about these things. Think about it. The ANC's Russian roulette has already had dire consequences for the economy. Last week, Formula One pulled the plug on the country's failure to denounce Russian aggression in Ukraine. Hundreds of millions of rands worth of foreign direct investment and advertising revenue for South Africa firms have already been lost as a result. But let me add something to this stupid statement. The real reason for the Formula One operators deciding to pull out of South Africa, the real reason, is they have zero faith in the logistics capabilities of the country. And specifically, that bundle of idiots that controls imports and exports. They are afraid their equipment is going to get lost or delayed. That is the big reason behind this. This story of Russia and all of that is smokescreen. South Africa now risks losing 60 billion worth of exports and a positive trade balance with the United States, currently protected under AGOA because of the ANC's dalliance with Moscow. That I've got news for them. If the Americans trashes AGOA, if they do it, what are the chances? Now you must think strategically. What are the chances that Russia, China, and Iran, and Saudi say, listen guys, our doors are open, bring your stuff. Don't be surprised if that is exactly what will happen. Because the Chinese are clever. They will not sit and see the South African economy collapse because of American actions. And the reality is, the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians can actually do a lot for our economy because they've got money. The Americans only have an overdraft. Think about that. The United States' long-standing relationship with South Africa is based on the principle of benefaction. Wow, whatever that may mean. Whilst China is indeed South Africa's largest single-country trading partner, this relationship is not based on benefaction. Okay. Last year, South Africa's trade deficit to China amounted to 177.89 billion. The trade with Russia accounts for as little as 0.3% of our country's trade ties. They are just not numbers. They are a bread and butter reality for millions of South Africans. A bread and butter reality. A bread baked by the globalist gang. Don't forget that. South Africa's exclusion from AGOA will destroy thousands of businesses, farms and jobs. And those invested in South Africa's success must do everything in our power to prevent this from happening. Okay, that sounds so terrible. But I have explained. 20% of the world's consumers on the left-hand side, 80% hungry consumers on the right-hand side. Think about that. If the DA was actually interested in South Africa and us, they would have done everything to exploit as much as possible opportunities from BRICS. They brag that they have the brains and all that, but it might be true that they have all the brains. The reality is they are playing for the WEF globalist gang. That is the reality. That is what you must never forget. They follow the instructions from the WEF. That's it. Not what is good for you and what is good for the country. What is good for the gang. The Premier of the Western Cape, Alan Winde, is currently in Washington to assure the US government that the province remains committed to the terms of AGOA. The DA has launched court action to compel South African government to arrest Vladimir Putin in August should arrive at the BRICS Summit and Promotion of Access to Information Act. Applications have also been launched to obtain full information related to the allegations that weapons were loaded onto the Lady R. Now let me remind you again. Dmitry Medvedev said it clear. Arrest of Putin is a de facto declaration of war against Russia. Does these idiots care? No. What gives them the false bravado? They think the Americans will be able to protect them when Russia comes for South Africa. And let me remind you, a few months ago, 2 strategic bombers landed on Waterkloof. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Those are the bombers that carries the bombs that can wipe South Africa out. Plus, a few weeks ago, Russia launched all their submarines. Their whole submarine fleet was sent into the sea. Nobody knows where those things are. Don't be surprised if 1 or 2 is not lurking around our coast. And but all of that submarines are carrying the Kinshal missiles. Missiles with ballistic heads, loads, and Kinshals with nuclear. Think about that. But that Winde wants to arrest Putin. Contrary to the fact that Medvedev made it clear, arrest Putin and it's war with Russia. Think about that. As the DA continues to meet with and remind foreign missions that the ANC does not represent the will of South African people, we will keep shining the torch of freedom, justice and democracy on our nation. And if there is ever a paragraph full of bullshit, that is it. The DA does not represent the population of South Africa. I said in one of my previous Skidmarks, if there's a poll, in a referendum in South Africa, BRICS or G7, BRICS should get in the vicinity of 80%. And somebody ran a poll like that on Twitter. And what was the results? The BRICS support, 85%. So, let me stop this now. What you need to keep in mind and take away from this, point number 1, the DA pushed the snakebite on us. The DA is pushing the alphabet gangster shit into our schools now. Both prominent WEF missions. Don't forget it. Third point, the DA is being used by the globalists to terrorize and sabotage BRICS. BRICS. That is not to the benefit of South Africa. That is to the benefit of the globalists. So don't let they come and tell you stories. And now they're threatening you with AGOA, and the rand will drop, and exports, and jobs, and shit like that. Remember what I told you about who's got the most consumers? Remember that. Plus, don't forget, America is the proud owner of a $32 trillion overdraft. Think about that. Please give me a like and a subscribe and share the thing. Have a great day.